management and a master's in public health. She's also a certified intrinsic coach and intrinsic coach mentor with more than 20 years of experience in the health and wellness industry. Rosie, take it away.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being with us today as we explore three things: why resiliency matters and what it is, how your thinking influences your sense of life balance and resiliency, and how you can build more resiliency into your life. And as we go through today, there may likely be some things that you see for yourself in a new or expanded way, or perhaps have some insights. When we have those moments of new self-awareness, they can often be lost as quickly as they came. So I encourage you to jot things down that come up for you throughout our time together today, so you can maybe refer back to it later and reconnect with whatever might open up for you here. With that, let's start by exploring why resiliency matters. But first, it's important to define it. Resiliency is simply being able to thrive in the face of uncertainty and change, to come back stronger in the face of adversity. And wouldn't we all like to be able to do that? Let's start by looking at this relationship between work and ourselves. Imagine that these two figures you see on your screen here represent three-tier wedding cakes. At the top of each cake are the outcomes that you are wanting to achieve in life. There are two parts of ourselves that contribute to whether or not we achieve those outcomes. The work or world side, in other words, us as a doer out there doing things for other people. We go to work, we might volunteer, we might help out with our kids or family members, etc. And the self side, this is us taking care of ourselves, our whole self. If your mission was to get that cake in one piece to $1 million wedding, which cake would you ultimately want to be responsible for? My guess is that you all just picked figure A. And why is that? Because it is more stable and has a better base. And notice what that base is. It's your self side. Yet we are so conditioned in this country to sacrifice ourselves at any cost, thinking we are helping. We will sacrifice our sleep, our own exercise, our hobbies, our children's events, and more to work more hours, to get a project done, maybe to do something for other people. And we think we are doing good. But how long can you honestly continue like figure B before you run out of energy and your cake basically topples over? We can do figure B in a pinch, but it's not sustainable over time. So your self side, or your well-being, really matters. And this is critical to being able to be resilient. But if you keep depleting yourself, you won't have the energy to enjoy the people and the things that matter to you in your life. And this visual has been huge for many of our clients in changing how they see themselves and their story around things related to their well-being. They start to look more at one choice at a time and what choice will honor me or best fuel the self side of my wedding cake, so to speak. So it starts to become less about shoulds and have-tos and willpower and more about making choices that serve you better from moment to moment. So with that, we just want to get you interacting with us today. We're going to take a short poll. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa for a moment to run our first poll today.
Thanks, Rosie. So you should see a poll on your screen here. Just a moment. I just have to bring it up. Which figure best describes you at this point in your life? Would you say figure A represented your life better, or figure B?
This is the easy poll. You just have two choices on this one.
Well, it looks like we've got a 50-50. We're going to close the poll. Whoop. All right, so I'll turn it back to Rosie.
Great. So 50-50 split, dead even. Great. So the 50% of you who are more like figure A, congratulations, and hopefully some of what we go through today will help you continue to maintain that sense of balance, if you will. And for the 50% of you who are, about to topple over, hopefully you'll bring some nuggets forward from today that will help you maybe start to feel a little bit more like figure A. With all of that being said, let's look at this relationship of capacity and energy. Well, essentially the definition of energy is the capacity to do work, and you could look at that work in your personal life or work in your professional life, but to get things done, in other words. So let's take an example of the first person over here on the left that looks a little crabby. This person is your typical person who's full-time, who would, essentially be working a 40-hour work week, whose wedding cake unfortunately looks more like figure B on the right of the previous slide. This person is working 10-hour days, working through lunches, not taking breaks, etc. So over the course of the day, this person's energy gets depleted, so they're averaging around 60% of their capacity. If you do the math, in a typical 5-day work week, while this person is physically putting in 50 hours, they are really maybe contributing 30 hours worth of work because they simply don't have the capacity. The second person over here on the right who's happier is the typical person whose wedding cake, like the 50% of you, looks much more like figure A on the previous slide. This person is working more sane 8-hour days, taking breaks and lunches, and renewing his or her energy throughout the day in various ways. Now, this person is only human, so capacity also dwindles, but only to about 80% capacity. So in a 5-day work week, this person is actually completing an additional 2 hours of work, 2 hours more than the first person. So while the first person is putting in an additional 10 physical hours and therefore having 10 fewer hours available for tending to personal well-being in the self side of the wedding cake, this person is producing 2 fewer hours of quality work. Which makes more sense? I think you would all agree that the one on the right makes sense, but it's counterintuitive to how our society is hardwired. But we need to realize that we are human beings, not human doings. We are not computers, and even computers will crash at some point. If we think about what it takes to truly recharge and to build our self side, it comes down to our daily choices and daily well-being. In his recently released book, Tom Rath explores this idea of being fully charged, and that when we're fully charged, we get more done, have better quality interactions, we have a sharp mind and a strong body. And on those days when we are fully charged, we experience high levels of engagement and well-being, which radiates from us and positively impacts those we care about. In other words, we have a solid foundation on which to build and that supports us in being resilient. And we've learned a lot from research about practices that lead to long-term well-being and longevity, but where people frequently struggle is translating that research into their daily routine. But now this new body of research has emerged that focuses on daily well-being and more about our daily experience, which is the product of both our positive and our negative experiences that we have throughout the day. And it's measured by asking people whether they have certain emotions during the day, like happiness or enjoyment or stress and other feelings, again, within a given day. And daily well-being and meaningful change is created in these moments and in days, not really in years and decades. And there are 3 key conditions that differentiate those days when we have this full charge from typical days. And the first is meaning. And they define this as doing something that benefits another person. And this doesn't have to be some big grand purpose where the sky's open. It could be something as simple as opening the door for somebody else, striking up a conversation with a stranger, striking up a conversation with a coworker that you never know might lead to a new idea that improves things. So it can just be small wins throughout the day, but you're making a difference in some way, shape, or form for another person. Interactions involves creating more positive than negative moments for ourselves. If you think about it, we tend to be very much focused on what is wrong. And can we flip things on their head and instead of going right to solving problems, look at what is going well, look at what we're wanting, these types of things. So we have more positive charges and positive interactions than negative. And finally, energy, which we've been talking about, is making choices that improve both our mental and physical health. And Tom Rath's research surveyed over 10,000 people to see how they were doing, and probably not surprising, they found that most people are struggling on a daily basis. And so with this idea of tending to the self side of our wedding cake and building a foundation that helps us in our quest to be more resilient and thrive in the face of uncertainty and change, it's a simple way to look at energy is that every single choice you make either boosts or recharges your energy, or it depletes it. If you think about anything that runs on batteries, a laptop, an iPad or tablet or a smartphone, as the day goes on, the battery gets depleted, much like our example of the two people earlier. And as this happens, the device starts running a little slower, the quality of the pictures and screen might go down, and overall it performs not as well. But if you recharge it throughout the day, it gets a boost, and it's back operating at or close to full capacity. So although we as humans are not machines, this can be a really good analogy for us. If we keep going and don't find ways to recharge throughout the day, our capacity diminishes and we aren't able to effectively contribute meaning, live our purpose, etc. So you know there are certain people, for example, you spend your time with who drain your energy and people who boost your energy. Maybe if you're feeling drained at the end of the day, rather than going for a walk, you want to do some gentle stretching or yoga or take a nice bath or read a book. So looking at terms of what will boost my energy or recharge me in this moment, or will it deplete me? And the more we can make choices that have this boost or recharge effect, the more effective we're going to be at supporting that self side of our wedding cake. And one way to gain a quick snapshot of how you're doing in terms of balancing the different aspects of your life is an assessment tool that's used widely in coaching called the Life Balance Wheel. And this is something that we use a lot in our can-do coaching as well. You see that there are multiple areas of well-being here that make up the wheel. And if you imagine that the center of the wheel for each section is 0, or your lowest possible satisfaction with that area, and the outer ring is 10, or your best possible satisfaction, what we do is ask people to draw a new arc that represents where you are in each section and then write the number by it. So you're basically drawing a new perimeter for the wheel. And the premise behind this life balance wheel is that if you think about a wheel on any vehicle that is trying to get you from where you are to where you want to be, the larger and more circular and balanced the wheel is, the greater ease it will move forward. And a wheel that looks more like this one on your screen or an amoeba or is kind of small and compact will also move forward, but will probably be a little bit more of a bumpy ride. Let's look at an example of this life balance wheel in action. What we do is we have clients complete this at our initial in-person session and again when we meet at 3 months, 6 months, and again at 12 months. But you could do this for yourself at any time. This, what you see, is an example of one of our coaching clients. And look at the difference in just 3 months. And she felt the benefit of having that profound shift. And I will tell you that her 6-month one was even a little bit more circular and balanced and sustained that at the 12-month mark. But what was so different in just this 3-month period? What was different was her thinking about the different areas and how she views these. For example, initially she rated significant other a 2 because she didn't have one. She didn't suddenly enter into a relationship at 3 months, but what she said is she's okay with not being in a relationship right now. It's just not what she needs in her life, and she's totally great with that. Likewise for her finances. Her finances didn't change that much in 3 months, but she recognized that she was taking control and she was working on a plan to improve them, doing all that she could at the time, and she felt pretty good about that. Even with fun and recreation, initially she was thinking how much she was missing out on by not going to plays and community events and these types of things. That's how she was viewing fun and recreation. But just 3 months later, she realized that, you know what, she brings fun into her daily life. She brings fun into her work, into basic daily tasks, and was really appreciating more that she does have fun in her life. It just looks different than she thought it should. And her life balance wheel, again, continued to improve by having this shift in thinking. It was her perspective. And so one of the things I hope you get from today is realizing that resiliency and well-being, a lot of this has to do with our perspective. And my guess might be that if some of you took this at the beginning today and were to take this again, even at the end, it might look dramatically different because it's really all about the lens that we use to see things. So let's look at this idea of perspective and thinking and how this relates to life balance and resiliency. We use this a lot in our coaching called the frame. And how we view or see things is ultimately critical to the choices that we make. We start in the upper left-hand quadrant here with how we see things. That's our attitude or our perceptions. How we see things influences how we feel about it. How we feel about it influences our behavior or what we do. And what we do gets us some kind of result. And the result that we get usually reinforces how we saw things in the first place. So the extreme example I like to use all the time, but it's helpful in this case, is let's say I'm going for a walk in the woods. And I look over and I see a snarly-toothed tiger. Chances are I'm going to feel scared. And if I feel scared, what am I going to do? I'm probably going to run like nobody's business to get out of there, which is going to get me some kind of result. I might be winded, it might be an adrenaline rush, but it's going to be, holy moly, I can't believe I avoided that potentially terrific or horrific experience, and it's going to give me great stories to tell at barbecues and parties. On the other hand, let's say I'm going for a walk in the woods and I don't see this tiger. I see a cardboard cutout of Tony the tiger, the Frosted Flakes mascot. I'm probably going to feel very different. I'm not going to be scared. I might be indifferent. I might be perplexed. I might be amused. So my do is going to be very different. I'm likely not going to run for my life. I might walk up to it. I might ignore it. Again, getting me a different result, reinforcing, I wonder why that cardboard cutout was sitting there. The point being that in either of these examples, both are completely relevant. What we do makes complete sense based on how we saw it. If I honestly thought I saw a tiger, of course I'm going to run. If I honestly saw a cardboard cutout, why would I run? And so our typical approach is to jump right here to the do and try to change our behaviors. But behaviors are really a manifestation of our underlying thinking. So unless we focus on building a solid foundation, the base of that wedding cake, by looking at how we see things and shifting our perspective, we will continue to fall back on habitual behaviors. Lasting change doesn't come from simply doing things differently. It comes from seeing or thinking about things differently, because what we do is a natural downward flow or natural progression or natural manifestation of how we see things in the first place. And usually when we're struggling, it's because we have jumped right here to the do. But when we can pause and back up and look at seeing things differently, the do will naturally happen without having to force it. In looking at how we see things, it can help to explain what we face with challenges with our well-being, and also when it comes to being resilient and things that maybe stress us out and topple over our wedding cake. There are two main types of challenges that we face. The first is called a technical challenge. Technical challenges are those that are fairly predictable. We can draw off of our existing knowledge and resources, or we can easily obtain the knowledge and skills to solve them. So if we need to get our car fixed or get a new computer, we can look at how we've addressed these in the past and go to a fairly straightforward prescriptive solution. Or in terms of energy that we were talking about, it's focusing on the technical aspects of what foods to eat, how we move our body, and the sleep that we get. And if people were predictable like machines, just focusing on these aspects should work. But we're not machines. And how often do you hear people, or perhaps even yourself, say, I know what I'm supposed to be doing, why can't I just do it? Well, the why you can't just do it speaks to the other type of challenge. Adaptive challenges are far more complex. We cannot use existing thinking or resources to solve them. We just can't knowledge or will ourselves to do it. Something gets in our way. And that something is usually something in our thinking that has us be uncomfortable or has us be stuck. In fact, we usually have some sort of almost visceral reaction when facing an adaptive challenge because it forces us to give up our self-protective mechanisms that have allowed us to function pretty well and even be successful up until this point. But it's usually at a price. And the reality is that well-being is really complex. That wheel, there's multiple components of it. And while there are technical aspects to it, most change that we're talking about and most of what gets in our way of being resilient really involves doing adaptive change work. Consequently, it requires being able to bring forward new and different thinking to inform our choices and our behaviors and ultimately our habits. But too often what we end up doing is trying to apply a mismatched solution to our well-being challenges, and it doesn't work so well. It's like hiring an auto mechanic when what you need is an electrician. It doesn't really make sense. Usually we're focused on what we need to do in terms of a technical change. But we don't typically address the much larger adaptive challenge, the things that contribute to you living out what you want for yourself in your life, to having meaning and purpose. Both the technical and adaptive aspects are important, but you see that this adaptive challenge part is much larger and requires a different approach. And when we do the adaptive change work, we are in a much better position to be able to effectively apply the technical solutions. But in order to do adaptive change work, you have to do work that allows you to draw off new and expanded thinking so that going back to that frame, you can see things differently. Here's another way to look at this. It can be explained by some really profound research done by a woman named Carol Dweck. She has found that what determines our success or lack thereof in life boils down to having one of two mindsets, a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. In a fixed mindset, we have to be perfect. We value and focus on the results, and we feel like we need to be the best. We view failure as a huge threat and see our talents perhaps as being more fixed, like we were born with them. As a result, it ends up with very rigid, very all-or-nothing thinking, so we might freak out if things don't go the way we think they should, or perfectionism isn't achieved, and we'll tend to be very hard on ourselves or others. In a growth mindset, we see perfectionism as a myth, and instead we value the process and the journey of stretching ourselves and taking on challenges. We actually embrace mistakes as an opportunity to learn and grow, and we have faith that we can recover from those mistakes. So I've been talking quite a bit, so we want to pause here for a moment, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, and we're going to take another quick poll.
Thank you, Rosie. So now we're going to take another quick poll. And here it is. Which of the following best describes your mindset? Do you primarily have a fixed mindset overall, a growth mindset, or a combination of the two? Go ahead and cast your vote.
We need like the Jeopardy theme song while people do it.
Yeah. Do, 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 do. All right, we just about have all of the polls in. All right, everybody's in. I am going to close this and share it. I'm going to write this down. 11%, 22%, and 67%. All right.
All right, so 11% have a fixed mindset. Is that right?
Yep, 11% have a fixed mindset, 22% have a growth mindset, and 67% have a mix of those two.
All right. So it'd be interesting, but I would just be willing to take a bet or a guess that the 22% of you that have primarily a growth mindset, that your wedding cake was also probably balanced. Just a hunch. But let's continue and look at this another way and further this discussion a little bit more. How we see things can also be framed in terms of what's known as the line. When we are above the line in our thinking, we tend to be more positive, optimistic, feel like we're in the driver's seat in life, have more energy, and so forth. When we're below the line, we tend to be more negative and pessimistic, have low energy, and feel like we're maybe a victim of circumstances. We're probably less patient as well. The list could go on and on. So another way to think of this is that below the line tends to show up more like a fixed mindset, or when our thinking isn't serving us so well, and above the line is more of a growth mindset, and when our thinking is serving us well. So we can also determine if our thinking is serving us well or not by just paying attention to how we view other people, our customers, our colleagues, our coworkers, our loved ones, etc. Typically, when we are above the line, we will see the best in people. We will maybe see them as fun, as loving, as well-intended, as hardworking, as compassionate, etc. When we're below the line, we tend to see them pretty much just the opposite. They're annoying, they're lazy, they don't have good intentions, we assume the worst, etc. And what's helpful is that when we can be aware that we have gone below the line, there are things in our life that can act kind of like a trampoline that can help spring us back above the line. And it can be a variety of things. Some people will say they can go for a short walk or listen to a favorite song or look at a picture of nature or be in nature or look at an inspirational quote, these types of things. So it's good to have these in our arsenal. The key is to be aware of our thinking, for only when we're aware of it can we actually draw off of those trampolines and make better choices. Here's another way that we can look at this. When I am below the line and possibly even a fixed mindset, I enter something called the self-deception box. And in this box, I tend to inflate my own good qualities, while at the same time, I inflate other people's not so good qualities. And in doing that, what happens is I start to justify how I see things, going back to that frame again, and I justify likely being below the line or in a fixed mindset. So remember, when I'm below the line, I'm going to see other people as lazy, inconsiderate, whatever, and I can justify that because if I am seeing myself as, well, I'm the one that's being fair, I'm working hard, all these types of things, I need to justify that. Our brains don't like to have this dissonance. So the more I can justify how I'm seeing things, it takes care of that disconnect that happens. And so what happens when I do this is I enter this box that I'm deceiving myself, and I really can't focus on results. And what I want to suggest to you today is that your influence and success in life depends on being out of this box. So I know it's cliche to say think outside the box, but it's important to be outside of the self-deception box. And you get out of that box as you cease resisting other people. In other words, when you shift your thinking and are able to be more mindful and choiceful from moment to moment, you can get out of the box, but you have to be aware of it first. So let's look at an example of being in our own self-deception box, because we all do it and do it all the time. We just maybe aren't aware of it. So I'm going to use a fictitious example here, but it starts over on the lower right-hand part of this box with what another person does. In this example, Bob is my employee. What does Bob do? Bob doesn't complete a project on time. Well, then what do I see? I see him as irresponsible, as disrespectful, as distracted, and lazy. And then, hello, I am now in my box, right? And I'm in it big time. Then, because that's what I see for Bob, what do? Well, I start to discipline him harshly. I start criticizing and micromanaging, and maybe I stop giving him projects altogether, because why would I if he's not going to complete them on time anyway? Well, if that's what I do, then what does Bob see? Right? Well, first of all, he's now entered his box based on what I'm doing, and he sees me as the boss from you-know-where. And now we have this vicious, unproductive cycle. And my guess is you can think about probably more than one person in your life where you probably regularly go into a box with them. But if I, instead of just Bob didn't complete a project on time, and if I was below the line that day and I didn't get enough sleep and I just jumped right to he's irresponsible, etc. But if I instead can hit that pause button and say, how else could I see this? Right? Can I be curious and say, well, I wonder what happened, or gosh, that's not like Bob, or maybe he's done this before, but I'm wondering if maybe I'm not supporting him as well as I could. Is there something that I didn't communicate well? Where's my ownership in this, right? And I start to see things differently. We both could potentially avoid the box. So I invite you to think about where this is showing up in your life, because it probably is, and if it's not, then I would invite you to consider you're probably in the self-deception box about it, because we all do this, right? Sometimes in more places than others. But when we start to have increased awareness of ourselves and our thinking, realizing when our thinking is serving us well, or when our fixed mindset might be getting the best of us, or when we're in the self-deception box, we get to know ourselves at an entirely more profound level. It can actually be exciting, maybe even a little like Billy Williams here, looking in a mirror for the first time. There's great opportunity with it when we get to know ourselves at a different level. So I invite you to think about what you're noticing for yourself at this point, and are you stuck in a rut in certain places with your thinking? It's very easy for stubborn, habitual thinking to lead to us being stuck in this rut. But in order to navigate the complexities of life and complexities of adaptive change, we have to be curious. We have to have a childlike mindset and the growth mindset, and look at how we can see things differently. That said, we are also tremendous creatures of habit. However, just because we've always done something a certain way doesn't mean it makes sense today. Life is constantly changing. And there's a great saying that says something like, the only difference between a rut and a grave is the depth of the excavation. And I think it's very true and speaks to the importance of doing the work to see things differently so we can ultimately do differently. Or to put it into simple wisdom from Albert Einstein, our current thinking is what got us into our current state. So if we want to have different results, we have to change our thinking. So let's explore this just a little bit further. If we take the frame and look at how we see ourselves, how we see stress, work, activity, food, weight, anything related to our well-being. Here we have what happened, or some type of action we want to take. And then over here we have this huge story about it. And the story might be things like, I've failed so many times, or I'll never succeed, or it's too hard, or I don't have the time to devote to this, or it's overwhelming, and so on, right? And so our story becomes really filled with drama and can lead to being stuck below the line or in the self-deception box with our less than quality thinking being in the driver's seat. And we forget that our story about what happened is very much distinct from the action itself. We act as if they're one thing. And so what ends up happening is our story and all these interpretations and how we see our situation becomes our reality. We say, well, it is what it is. And we live as if our story is that reality. Let's use work as an example. What happened might be you received an email from a colleague with some constructive feedback. But then your story about that email is all full of drama about what we presume the intentions were of the other person, and pulling in all kinds of things that aren't there into our interpreting the message. So we end up kind of in that self-deception box. But they are two very distinct and different things. Or let's say something like you're stuck in traffic. What happened is that someone cut you off. But then your story might be, oh, that person's a jerk, or they did it on purpose, or blah, 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 blah. And suddenly you're all worked up and tense. But that's just the story you've chosen to create in that moment that may or may not be at all true, right? That's how you've chosen to see it. That said, if we can recognize what happens or a particular action for what it is, and that it is separate from our story, we can start to see other options or interpretations. And we can also change our story, because it's just a story. You have a blank screen or a blank canvas or blank piece of paper. So instead of focusing on all that is wrong or limitations and frustrations associated with making change, making healthier choices, etc., what might be happening at work, we can try on some new stories and see what might fit better. You know, maybe I'm trying things I normally wouldn't have, or meeting people I normally wouldn't have, or I'm stretching myself, right? I'm in that growth mindset and challenging my fixed mindset, and I know that's a good thing. And when we can start to change our story and shift how we see things, we are in a much better space to try different ways of caring for ourselves and honoring that self side. With that, I want to tell you a short story about a coaching client who happened to be in our manager stress track. After a couple of months working with her and challenging her to do some of this work to get off autopilot and start to value herself more and start to clarify more of what she wanted for herself, she had a really important realization. She hadn't really been doing the exercises and the activities that I had given her, or really much of anything else we provided her, and she realized, because she had this underlying fear and story that this is going to be like every other time she's tried to manage her stress, and she had this story of it just is what it is and that it's not changeable. And so with this underlying story, she realized she wasn't fully committed to this process of her own growth. So I challenged her to look at changing how she was seeing this and her story. And so I asked her if she looked at it more as an experiment and not a commitment, right? That she was just going to play with trying this stuff on. If that would support, if she was playing with what would support the self side of her wedding cake, what she would notice. And for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, just sit in this space of, I'm just playing, I'm experimenting. And I asked if just making that subtle shift opened up anything for her. And she said for her that was huge. Reframing things in a non-committal way helped calm her autopilot thinking in her story and allowed her to finally start experimenting with the various exercises and resources and started to shift her focus. But it wasn't until she found a story that suited her better that she was able to get unblocked and actually start doing some meaningful work and actually improve her stress and build her resiliency. What this client experienced is not uncommon at all, and it can be explained really well by the work of Viktor Frankl. For those of you who are not familiar with him, I highly recommend looking into him. But he was a neurologist and psychiatrist from Vienna, Austria. And during World War II, he spent 3 years in various concentration camps. And in 1946, he wrote a really well-known book called Man's Search for Meaning. And it chronicled his experiences as an Auschwitz concentration camp inmate during World War II. And it described his work involving identifying a purpose in life to feel positive about and really intentionally imagining that outcome. And Frankl concluded from his experience that prisoners' psychological reactions are not solely the result of the conditions of his life, but there's also a freedom of choice that we have even in severe suffering. The choice to see things in a way that serves us well or doesn't. And when the prisoners would lose hope or be stuck, he doesn't use this language, but be stuck below the line, so to speak, they were more doomed. So I love this quote from him because it really speaks to so many things. And for the purposes of today, it's shifting our perspective and how we see things to find a greater sense of balance and to really build that resiliency. And it also speaks to another quote from him, which is kind of getting off autopilot. Between stimulus and response, there's that space. And if we just pause and go, hold on a second, could I see this in a different way? What am I noticing? Am I in my self-deception box? When we insert that pause, we can bring some intentionality and, again, feel like we're more in the driver's seat. Having said all of this, let's put all this together and take a look now at how we can take this awareness of thinking and bringing forward better thinking to build greater resiliency in our lives. Resiliency is something that we can learn, and resilient people have some common characteristics. The first is they don't sweat the small stuff. They don't, get worked up over a hangnail or something simple that happened. And because of that, they are able to be at their best and maintain this sense of balance, if you will, when faced with the big stuff or major challenges, because they're able to put things in a perspective. And they are flexible. They're not rigid, but they're also durable. So because of that, they can go with the flow better. Right? If they're in a fixed mindset and it's all about perfectionism, it has to look a certain way, we get very rigid and freak out if things don't go our way. If we can have that growth mindset and kind of go, okay, hold on a second, we're better able to adapt and adjust. And they come back stronger in the face of adversity, which we talked about earlier with the definition of resiliency. So I invite you to think of someone you know right now who lights up a room when they walk in. They just have that something about them that you want to be around. They have a groundedness, a calmness, maybe an energy, something about them that you feel better and you like being around them. Most likely that person is resilient because they can go with the flow. They are strong. They do come back with in the face of adversity, but they're not drama kings and queens. They're not getting worked up over every little thing. And someone for me who immediately comes to mind as the epitome of resilience is Nelson Mandela. So let's look more then at how we can build resiliency. As I already mentioned, resiliency can be learned, but it takes practice and it takes a commitment to shifting our way of being and our way of thinking. So it's like learning a new language for how we talk to ourselves. It takes time, it takes practice, just like it did back when you learned to drive a car or learning to play golf or learning to dance, right? It's not an overnight thing. The first is putting things into perspective. So when something happens, think to yourself, okay, hold on. Will this still be a big deal tomorrow? And if your answer is yes, say, okay, well, will it still be a big deal 1 week from now, a month from now? And then you can gauge what attention you do or don't want to give to it. You don't want to give things or situations unnecessary attention or worry. So by putting things into perspective in terms of how big of a deal are they really can help you determine if this warrants your attention or not. Be mindful of what comes out of your mouth. We know that the mind and body are powerfully connected. For example, there's a case study in the literature, the psychology literature, about a man who had a terrible problem with being a kleptomaniac or shoplifting. And he tried literally everything, but he couldn't stop. So he went to the psychiatrist who specializes in hypnosis. And the psychiatrist hypnotized the man and said, the next time you go to try to steal something, you won't be able to complete the act because your hand will freeze in midair. Well, the next day, which happened to be in the middle of July, the psychiatrist received a phone call from a convenience store manager who found his business card in this man's pocket. They were totally perplexed because this man had severe frostbite in the middle of summer. His mind literally froze his hand. That's how powerfully connected the mind and body are. So if you say this is going to be hard, this is going to suck, this is going to be torturous, it's probably going to be. If you say, hey, I'm going to change my story and this is an opportunity to so bad, or the next is, again, common sense, but practice acts of gratitude. It can be so easy to get caught up in all that isn't right in our world. But, for example, if we almost got in a car accident, we could choose to be thankful for being spared versus dwelling and having the drama of what almost happened. And even on our worst days, find 3 to 5 things that you're thankful for at the end of the day. And you may have to stretch it. It might be, I'm thankful I have running water and a roof over my head because it was that bad of a day. But you find something, and there's tremendous research about gratitude to look at how that helps with stress, how that helps with all kinds of physical ailments. It's really a profound habit to get into. Live in the present moment. Being present and being mindful is one of the best ways to build resiliency because you are living life as it unfolds, right? Our brain can get ahead of us and start imagining all the worst things that can happen, but we can kind of, again, hit that pause button and say, okay, I don't know what the future holds. I don't have a crystal ball. Nobody does. Knowing that I can't control the outcome, what is important for me to keep in mind for myself today? Knowing what's going on and knowing that I don't know what's going to happen with this health condition or with this financial situation or with work, what am I wanting for myself today? That's a place that we can go and be in the present and then look at what choices will help give me the energy I need to get through this today. What choices are most appropriate for me today? And that's a place we can always go that really helps increase and strengthen our resiliency. Pay it forward. But don't expect things in return, right? So if you remember that movie, Pay It Forward, you just do something simple and nice for the sake of doing it. As soon as we expect something in return, it leads to disappointment. So we just want to, again, have meaning. Do something that benefits another person. And it can be something small, but it's profound because it benefits us and the other person when we pay it forward. Stop settling. You train the world how to treat you. So if you keep settling for things rather than advocating for what you want for yourself and what really matters to you, it's easy to get caught up in all of the struggles and challenges rather than viewing them as opportunities. I can't tell you how many clients that I coach that really are settling and that they just kind of let others dictate their lives, and they're struggling a lot. When they start to get clear about what they want and they start to speak up and say yes to things and no to things, and it's a profoundly different experience. And finally, give yourself a break. As we talked about with the fixed mindset and growth mindset, perfection is a myth. It doesn't exist. So the more we can appreciate our own humanity and embrace that we are all works in progress, the easier it is to find balance and adapt to the curveballs that life throws at us. It also means to replenish your well and energy and tend to the self side of your wedding cake. And another thing to consider when it comes to building resiliency is who is actually in the driver's seat and running your life. If you imagine a plate, it has two circles. It has the center circle where you typically put food, and then it has this outer rim. Well, the center of the circle, or the center circle, is our core. That is our true self. It's what matters to us. It's our purpose. It's what we're wanting for ourselves. It's what we care about. And it's recognizing that our worth comes from who we are as a human, not from our work, our degrees, our accomplishments, our health status, our weight, etc. The core is us as human beings. The outer circle, on the other hand, is the circumference. And out here we have three things. We have other people's opinions, we have other people's expectations, and other people's attitudes. And when we're living more on this circumference, we're typically really busy, there's lots going on, we're reacting to others, and we tend to be spending our energy on what we think we should be doing. The circumference is us as a human doing. So with that, we're going to take one more short poll. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Okay, here is our final poll today. Which best describes you at this point in your life? Do you live from your core, or do you live from your circumference?
See if we still have quick responders.
Yeah, we do. Looks like the majority are living in their circumference.
Not surprising, especially in healthcare, for those that are on the call that are in healthcare.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So we've got 35% live from their core and 65% live from their circumference.
Okay. Well, the 65% you living from your circumference, you're not alone. We see this a lot, and we tend to see this a lot with people who go into professions that they want to help other people. We tend to put ourselves last. It's that wedding cake thing again. So why does this all matter? Well, let's look at an example of a fish. Bear with me for a second. So if you are in a boat and you catch a fish, you take it out of its natural element and you place that fish in the bottom of the boat. What will happen? It's going to flop around like crazy. It's trying to adapt to the circumference or its environment, and it's struggling, right? But then if you pick that fish up, if you can catch it, and you put it back in the water, it will, boom, swim off with ease like nothing ever happened, because it's in its element that aligns with its core, right? In that respect, we can think of this idea of balance like the fish example. If we are in our core, balance is easier. We could put 1 to 2 fingers in the center of this plate and pile all kinds of stuff on that plate and still be able to balance and find a sense of calm, purpose, and happiness, right? I know people who you would look at them and, you know, they've been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and they've got financial stuff blowing up and they've got stuff all around them, and they are just centered and grounded because they are able to put it into perspective of what matters to them at their core, and they're fine. And you have someone else, again, who has a hangnail or, you know, something doesn't happen right and they're falling apart. And so those are the people who are on the circumference, right? There's no way we could balance the plate with only 1 or 2 fingers on that circumference. And the more that our core and circumference are out of alignment, like we're saying no to things that we really wish we could say yes to and vice versa, we experience greater stress, guilt, and resentment. So this next slide is perhaps more for the 65% of you on the circumference, but a really good short motto is just this: don't should on me. With that, I want to share a story with you that speaks to having resiliency, not letting people should on you, and living with intention. Long ago, there was a man who every day came upon this beautiful fruit tree. And every day the wind would blow just enough where one or two pieces of fruit would fall. And the fruit was juicy and satisfying, and the man enjoyed it very much. And this continued day after day, week after week, month after month. So this is kind of like when life is just humming along and going well, and perhaps we take it for granted. Well, one day the man went to the tree, but the wind did not blow, and the fruit did not fall. And day after day, the same thing happened. No wind, no fruit. Eventually, the man became really distraught, and he started having temper tantrums. He would kick and scream at the base of the tree and cry, "Why? Right? I'm hungry, I'm thirsty." And one day, a wise old man came along and witnessed this younger man carrying on and having a fit. And the wise old man asked him, "What's the matter?" And this other man started to explain how the wind stopped blowing and he had no fruit. And the wise man just looked at him and said in a pretty matter-of-fact way, "Well, why don't you just get up and shake the tree?" Right? And so he did, and he took matters into his own hands. And so I ask you, are you sitting around below the line, stuck in an old story, waiting for someone else to do or be differently? Or are you in the driver's seat and shaking your own tree? Are you living with intention? And when we can pause and focus on changing our story and using our resources to get above the line, we're more likely to shake the tree, so to speak. When we're below the line, we're more likely to feel like a victim. How do we live with intention then? Well, being able to address our adaptive challenges and operate more from an above-the-line or growth mindset perspective requires us to be more choiceful, even in the face of adversity. That's living with intention, but we can't do that if we're not tending to ourselves, to that self side of our wedding cake. We don't have a foundation. We don't have the capacity. One of the best questions to help with living with intention and being resilient is what I said earlier, is what am I wanting for myself in this moment? Given the circumstances, and that no matter how much I wish I can't change it. I can't change the situation. I can't change another person. So given that it is how it is, what am I wanting for myself inside of all of that, right? Or given that work is changing right now, what are we wanting as a team, right? What we can control that piece. And then focus more on the moment and baby steps if the big picture is just too daunting. And one thing that can be incredibly helpful, which is challenging for those of us that are used to helping others, but is to be humble and admit we're not superheroes. We can't do it all. We're only human. So if your colleague is struggling, are you judging them or are you reaching out to offer support? Not everyone will ask for support on their own accord for a variety of reasons. And then when we do make changes, give ourselves credit for even small changes. And all of these, again, allow you to live more with intention and be resilient. But it's important to be aware of the part of our brain that likes to get in our way of being able to do this. In coaching, we refer to the gremlin. And this is the part of our brain in thinking that wants immediate gratification, prefers the status quo, even when the status quo isn't serving us well. It's what causes us to have that visceral reaction when our thinking is challenged, and is frequently the culprit of why we can't just do it with regards to change. In other words, it tries to undermine our adaptive change efforts, undermine our growth mindset. Another way to think about this is that our gremlin is usually our first thought. The problem becomes when we act on that first thought, because it's not usually coming from our higher level brain functioning or our best thinking. So if we can start to better recognize what is guiding our thinking, we are better able to intentionally create the life we want for ourselves. And how we do that is pretty simple, but it does take awareness and takes practice. The beauty of the gremlin is that once we become more aware of our thinking, it ceases to have the power and hold on us, because we can just go, oh, is that my gremlin? So we can pause and basically ask ourselves, is this coming from my best thinking? or is this coming from my gremlin? And research shows it only takes about 3 to 5 seconds to pause to disable the dominance of that gremlin and create a space for better thinking. So simply starting to build a practice of pausing a few seconds before you act on a thought can build this muscle, can get you in the driver's seat, can bring more intentionality into your life, even if you're facing adversity. And so as we wrap up and bring this all full circle, we also know that how we respond to different situations can have a boost in our energy or a positive charge, or it can deplete us. So as I was just talking about the pause, when we also can pause and we can view and reframe and see stressors and challenges as opportunities for learning, as opportunities for growth versus seeing all the bad in it, we actually experience fewer of the negative health consequences of it as well. And as we wrap up today, I want to tell you one more story. There's a well-known story that goes something kind of like this. A busy executive was driving a little too fast in his Jaguar down a neighborhood street when suddenly, bam, he felt something hit his car. He immediately stopped, got out, and he was furious when he saw this dent on the side of his car with a brick laying there. Then he looked over and saw this young boy who yelled to him through tears, "I'm so sorry, mister, but I didn't know how else to get your attention. My disabled brother over here fell in his wheelchair, and he's hurt, and I can't get him back in the chair myself, and no one will stop." Imagine what you would do. Well, the man immediately walked over, saw the hurt boy, helped him back into his chair, and waited until he knew the boys were okay and on their way home. He walked slowly with his head held low back to his car, trying to process what just happened. And then he looked at that dent in his car for a long time. And he decided, although he could get it fixed, he kept it there as a reminder to himself to not speed through life so fast that someone has to throw a brick at him to get his attention and for him to be present. And this story is a great illustration of what can happen when we don't pause and the gremlin hijacks our thinking. The gremlin is so powerful that it can take someone hitting us with a brick before we stop and pay attention. It takes us getting diagnosed with something, etc., till we are a human being, not a human doing. And you know, I think that kids can teach us a lot about resiliency and pausing and being present. They are constantly embracing change and are curious and are learning. And they have an incredible ability to bounce back. They are tremendously resilient. So what are some lessons that we can learn from a 3-year-old? Well, we can find our balance and our resiliency and our inner strength when we don't underestimate the power of the simple things in life. And sometimes you need to just stop and smell the flowers and be present. And we realize that the only thing constant in life besides death and taxes is change. And so balance isn't something we achieve once. The wedding cake isn't balanced once. We have to make constant, subtle adjustments to be able to see things differently and find ourselves and be stronger in the face of change and adversity and uncertainty. And making these subtle adjustments allows us to embrace our humanity and be better, not perfect. And we do address all of this and more for those of you that are interested in our Manage Your Stress, Build Resiliency track with Can Do, with a combination of in-person and phone sessions. But we are at just 1 or 2 minutes left, and I would love to just hear from some of you in the question box if there's anything that's opening up for you, or if there's any questions that you have as we wrap up today.
Okay, Rosie, it looks like we have one question. Let's see here. I'm not sure if health coaching would be right for me. Can I try it out before I commit to 6 months of coaching?
Sure. So we, for those of you that are interested in exploring this with any of our coaching tracks, we do offer something that's called a coaching test drive conversation, and you get a half hour on the phone with a coach to actually have a coaching conversation to see what this type of work is like.
Great. Well, on behalf of Rosie and the Can Do team, I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We hope it helped you understand why resiliency matters and how you can